Look, I don't need to tell you that Mario has ventured out into tons of spin-off franchises, some of which have defined their respective genres. You also probably know that Paper Mario is one of the most beloved spin-offs in this series. Paper Mario fans are really passionate people. Almost all of them will say that Thousand Year Door is one of the greatest RPGs ever made, or in some cases, one of the best games ever.
That's because it is.
Dude, shut up, I haven't even introduced you yet. It's always been a series that interested me, but for a while I was just an outsider. One of, if not the first console I've owned was the Nintendo 3DS. It wasn't the first console I played, that would be the Wii, but that was mostly a family console at the time. My 3DS was mine. I played a lot of games on this thing, and one of the games I remember playing was Paper Mario Sticker Star. This is often regarded as the worst Paper Mario game, and from what I've heard online, it sounds like a pretty shitty game, but I was like 5 or 6 when I had this game, and I never played much of it anyway. I think I only played the first few levels. I was really young back then, so I guess I just didn't understand how that kind of game works, nor was I really able to detect if a game was good or bad. I also bought Origami King on day 1 because I wanted to get into the series, but that game just didn't do much for me honestly, and I only ended up playing through the first area. The combat system was interesting, I'll give it that, but it's not really the kind of combat I'd want in an RPG, since there's no challenge beyond lining the enemies up. Also, the story just didn't grip me at all. Many of you probably already know, but for a while now, the Paper Mario series has been moving away from RPGs into more adventure games, and on top of that, they've gotten a lot less original in their writing and character designs. The third game was literally a platformer, which I've actually owned for a really long time, but I still haven't played it. Maybe one day, people say it's good. In terms of other Mario RPGs, I owned a handful of Mario and Luigi games growing up. Of course, I'd won a series called Mario and Luigi. I was obsessed with Mario at the time. Still kinda am. I also didn't play much of these games, likely because I just didn't get RPGs. You'd think my first RPG would be a Mario one due to how big of a fan I am, but the first RPG I played, or at least really got into, was Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood. Man, I just love playing shit games in my childhood. I've heard a lot about how mediocre and bad this game is, but damn it, I had so much fun playing this game when I was like 7. I remember almost beating it, which is not something I did with games very often at that age, but I remember one of the final bosses just being too hard for me and I kinda just stopped. That wasn't super uncommon. I remember getting stuck on bosses all the time in that game, but with enough patience I was able to nearly get to the end. For a while now, I've really wanted to give the first 2 Paper Mario games a shot due to how beloved they are, and a few months ago I played through the first game, and I loved it. That's why I wanted to make this video. I thought about playing Super Mario RPG first because this was the first actual Mario RPG, but we can put that on hold for now because I still haven't played it, so we'll just stick with Paper Mario. But okay, let's jump in and find out what makes Paper Mario so great.
Not without me, you aren't.
Naty, the hell are you doing here?
I don't know.
Okay, good point.
My first time ever playing Paper Mario was back during the Wii era, presumably around 2011. I was very young at the time, but this wasn't my very first Mario RPG that I played. That one being Super Mario RPG for the SNES. I had both of those games for the Wii Virtual Console, which had sadly been discontinued as of January 2019. But those games have been glued to my memory as a child, and is still one of my favorite, if not favorite game of all time, being Paper Mario of course. The game itself means a lot to me in many ways. It's one of the real first video games I'd ever played. Now let's stop talking about me. Let's talk about the actual game itself. Here we go, Brandt. Once upon a time, there was a place high above the clouds called Star Haven. At Star Haven, there lies the Star Rod, which has the ability to grant any wishes. The Star Rod being in the hands of evil definitely wouldn't be good. So the 7 star spirits watch over the world and guard the Star Rod. When Bowser finds out about this, he wishes for many selfish things that obviously get rejected. Eventually, he's had enough and breaks into the sanctuary with his new assistant Kammy Koopa and steals the Star Rod for himself, and captures all 7 star spirits, sealing them inside these cards. Sometime later, Mario and Luigi receive a letter from Princess Peach about how she's throwing a big party in her castle and invites them over.
Yep, there's Luigi's shining role right there. Man gets no attention in this game and it honestly makes me sad. At least you can visit him.
Mario and Luigi arrive at the castle for the party, and while Luigi's doing whatever, Mario goes with Princess Peach to have some alone time. Okay, we all know where this is going, so let's just cut to the chase.
Actually, I think we should back up a little bit. Basically, Bowser managed to dig his castle underneath Peach's castle, and it starts rising up out of the atmosphere. I'm not even gonna begin to question how he managed to do that, in addition to not getting caught, but I don't even care. Bowser also shows up to crash Mario and Peach's alone time, and with the power of the Star Rod, Bowser basically makes himself insanely strong to the extent that he's basically invincible.
Since Mario stands like no chance here, he loses the fight, and Bowser uses the power of the Star Rod to kick Mario right out of the castle, and falls to what seems to be his death, but he ends up being fine. Mario makes it back to Toad Town, and heads to Shooting Star Summit, where the Star Spirits use the little power they have left to communicate with Mario, and inform them that they have been captured by Bowser, and he must travel to where all the Star Spirits are located, and defeat whoever Bowser ordered to guard each spirit.
That's the basic gist of the plot, and your overall goal never really changes because there aren't any of what I would call plot twists. Like, spoiler alert, Mario frees all the Star Spirits. With a genre that's known for usually having great narratives and immersive worlds, being RPGs, you'd think they would finally have the chance to go all out with the complex narrative, but they mostly use the medium to add some flair to the already existing Mario plot, where he has to save Peach and stop Bowser. For example, Bowser doesn't just capture Peach because he feels like it today, he captures her because he's tired of always losing to Mario, so he uses the Star Rod to make his dreams come true where he beats Mario and has Peach all to himself. And anyone who's played this game knows how great Bowser's writing is in this game. He's a big goofball who's entirely full of himself, and that's why I love him.
Also, instead of just going to rescue Peach, Mario has to collect the Star Spirits and use their combined power to defeat Bowser, which gives him more of a reason to travel to the 7 different areas, besides just getting to Bowser's castle.
In my opinion, where this game is lacking in its simple narrative structure, it makes up for it with its fun and charming cast of characters and writing that is pretty humorous. I don't laugh out loud when playing Paper Mario, but there are a lot of lines that make me say, that's pretty funny when I'm playing, you know? Also, if we're still talking about the intro, I must ask, why the hell can you not use action commands during the prologue?
Yeah, it's pretty stupid to be honest. Mostly all the battles in the first hour of the game are basically scripted, because the only thing you'll be doing is attacking. It really could have made these pretty simple battles more engaging with you having to actually time your attacks.
It does kind of make the beginning feel kind of slow, which is a trait that plagues many RPGs. What are these action commands I speak of? Let's put the story on hold for now, and talk about what those action commands are by discussing the battle system. Like most RPGs, Paper Mario uses a turn-based combat system. However, as we go further into the ins and outs of the combat, you'll realize that it plays very differently when compared to most RPGs, which gives this combat its own unique flair. A good way to describe this would be easy to learn but hard to master. As Mario, you have 2 main methods of attack in battle, jumping on enemies and smashing them with your hammer. Each type has their own advantages and disadvantages. With the jump attack, you can jump on any enemy in the lineup, as well as enemies that are in the air, but if enemies have something like a spike on their head, you'll take damage. There are some enemies that Mario just can't really touch in general, and using the hammer to damage them can fix that, but you can only attack grounded enemies in the one that is closest to Mario. Honestly, I have to commend Paper Mario for its enemy variety. In most RPGs, enemy variety comes in the form of attacks and stat differences, but in Paper Mario, enemies can have lots of different properties beyond stats. Some enemies can only be damaged with hammer or jump attacks, but there's more beyond that. To really deal damage to Koopa Troopas, you'll have to jump on them to flip them over, because without that, their defense can be pretty high. If you attack a Bob-omb, their fuse will be ignited, so you'll not only have to kill them on that turn so they can't blow up in your face, but you have to be careful and use an attack where you technically aren't touching them. There's also enemies that will lurk on ceilings, so you'll have to use a partner to knock them down before Mario can hit them. Those are just a few examples, but I think you get the point now.
Another great addition that really makes Paper Mario stand out among the crowd of RPGs is the action command system. When performing basically any kind of attack, you'll need to quickly input some buttons to increase your attack damage. They come in many types, like simply pressing the A button before an impact, rapidly pushing the analog stick to the left, holding a button, or mashing a button. There's a lot of them.
Lackluster's action command is quite weird. You just have to aim this crosshair at the enemy, which is really easy, if a little sensitive.
You can also use action commands when enemies are attacking. If you press the A button right before you get hit, you can reduce the damage taken. This adds a lot of strategy to encounters because you'll have to memorize enemy attacks and how to take less damage. The ways in which they attack and how you'll have to master their attack patterns to succeed adds to the enemy variety we mentioned earlier. The action commands also add to this game having combat that's easy to learn, but hard to master because pros can take advantage of the action commands to do a lot of damage with some skill.
Also, this game's damage values are much smaller than most RPGs. It's pretty common for RPGs to at least have double-digit numbers in their damage values, usually triple digits and sometimes even more than that. In Paper Mario, attacks will rarely go over 10 damage. It keeps things very simple in that aspect. And on top of that, attacks will never miss, you don't ever get lucky critical hits, and attacks will always do the same amount of damage. It's only based on whether or not you pull off an action command. Because of that, enemy health pulls aren't usually big either. The game doesn't have health bars bars unless you tattle on them or use the peekaboo badge, but fortunately keeping track of their health is very easy because it's simple mental math. People say this is such a good thing because when attacks and HP pools are really high in most RPGs, it's hard to keep track of how effective your attacks are, but have you ever played an RPG with health bars before? From what I've played, they're quite common. Either way, it's an issue that still exists in some RPGs and Paper Mario fixes that. You also don't get stronger by leveling up or anything, you instead have to find upgrades to your boots and hammer in the overworld, and they also let you perform new moves while exploring. Stronger hammers let you break stronger blocks, and the super boots let you ground pound, and the ultra boots let you jump a little higher. I have no idea why this one is called the spin jump while the one where you actually spin isn't. How do you level up? Let's talk about it.
The XP system is another aspect in which Paper Mario deviates compared to your traditional RPG. Killing an enemy can reward you with star points. The amount of star points you get varies from enemy to enemy, but that amount also scales with your current level, which basically disincentivizes grinding. You level up by reaching a total of 100 star points, which resets the counter and you're brought to this screen, where you can upgrade your health points, your flower points, or your badge points. HP is exactly what you would expect, 50 is the max. FP is essentially this game's version of mana, because every RPG has that. In addition to your regular attacks, some special abilities cost a certain amount of FP to execute. There are a lot of skills that cost FP, like new forms of attacks, maybe one that's good for spread damage, inflict some status ailments, and they can also do things that apply stat buffs and debuffs. There's obviously more than that, but I don't really need to cover all of them. Lastly, you have badge points, which are definitely something unique this game has. Badges are these items that Mario can equip, and they give Mario many different abilities. Some can teach Mario's new skills, ones that usually cost FP. Others can give you passive buffs or effects. There really is a lot of them. To equip badges, you need to have the required amount of BP, which means that you'll have to think carefully about which badges are the best to equip for certain situations. Mario is essentially a blank slate in this game, and there are many options when it comes to customizations.
With this playthrough, I went for a build that prioritized pure damage above all else. I had Power Plus equipped, which raises your damage by 1 for 6 badge points, but they don't tell you that it actually increases your jump damage by 2, since Mario attacks twice when jumping to add up to 6 by the end of the game, but now we have 8. In addition to that, I also had All or Nothing equipped, which also raises the power of your attacks by 1, assuming you can nail the action command. None of them are hard or anything, so I would highly recommend equipping this at the cost of only 4 badge points. Instead of my normal jump only doing 6 damage, I was doing 10. That's insane. Because of that, the game wasn't that hard. Actually, soon after I started doing 10 damage, I unequipped Power Plus and just stuck with All or Nothing, because I still wanted a decent challenge.
I personally enjoy the badge stat, since it can provide you with crucial badge points for badges that you collect along your journey. But if we're talking about badges themselves, then I personally like the offensive and defensive types of badges. For example, Last Stand is a great badge to have late game. Chapter 8. When Mario's HP gets low and he's in danger, he will only receive half as much damage as normal. Mega Rush is used if Mario's HP drops to 1 and he's in peril. His attack power goes up by 4. This badge is used by literally everyone I know that plays this game. It's crazy to even think of why somebody wouldn't have this badge on, because who wouldn't want their attack damage going up by 4 when they only got like 1 health point left? Anyways, next badge is Close Call. You actually receive this badge really early in the game. No, like not even 20 minutes in. Anyways, when Mario has low HP and is in danger, enemies will occasionally miss when attacking. This one is self-explanatory. Getting lucky, which means when the enemy misses their attack, is crucial if you're on a boss or have no health up items. There are many more badges to go over in Paper Mario, but that would take up most of the video, considering the fact that there are 80 badges to be exact.
But of course, you can't forget all the partners that joined Mario on his journey to rescue Princess Peach for whatever reasons, because they can help Mario with fighting as well. I must emphasize, with fighting. Something that surprised me is how partners aren't really what you would call party members in a normal RPG. They can't use items, they can't use star abilities, and they share FP with Mario. All partners can do in battle is either attack or do nothing. They don't even have their own HP, for God's sake. Most attacks won't target your partners, but some do, so you'll need to get the action commands down with them, otherwise they'll get injured and won't be able to move for a few turns. Would giving them HP be that hard? You can upgrade them twice to learn a new special ability and increase their damage, so they'll learn new and stronger abilities, which is good. Anyways, there's 8 partners total, but how good are they individually? Let's check them out. On my first playthrough, I completely disregarded Goombario in combat. I assumed he would be really bad since he's the first partner in the game. His overworld ability literally just tells you about the location, can you blame me? What I fail to realize is how he actually does the most base damage, being 6. Really, he's just about headbocking enemies, because he has charge, which increases the damage for the next turn, which I don't use very much, and multi-bonk, which lets you jump on enemies over and over again until you miss the action command or the game decides to stop you because of how overpowered the nature of this move is.
Goomba was only really useful before Chapter 2, knowing that he's one of your only partners at this stage of the game. Goomba has Tattle, which is, I guess, useful for those who really want to know how much health a fucking Koopa Trooper has. Personally, I never really used him after I got Koopa in Chapter 1. He's superior in all ways.
Koopa specializes in dealing spread damage with his shell attacks, but he can only attack grounded enemies. Shell Toss hits every enemy on the ground. It's also very useful early in the game since most enemies are grounded, and it does good damage at that point. Dizzy Shell makes all enemies dizzy, which is alright. Fire Shell is basically a stronger version of Shell Toss, but also has the benefit of dealing fire damage. It's actually the only attack that can kill Dry Bones. You know, the one enemy that was immune to fireballs. So yeah, I think he's good for the first 2 chapters.
Koopa is a great partner for early game battling. Power Shell is just amazing for taking care of battles in a quick succession. Using him for spread damage early game is key for your battles. I never really used him much later in my playthroughs because of the other partners that you get, but that doesn't mean you don't have to use him either. But in my opinion, Koopa is a really solid partner.
Bombette was a partner that I barely used at all in my first playthrough, and that didn't change much on this one. Since she's a Bomb, all of her attacks are just about blowing enemies up. Bomb just does a lot of damage to one enemy, Power Bomb does a lot of damage to all grounded enemies, and Mega Bomb does a lot of damage to all enemies, grounded or airborne. She sounds pretty good, but frankly I still didn't really use her much, because I think there are better options for not only base damage but spread damage too. The most damage she'll do is 7, and when it comes to spread damage, there are some from other party members that do around the same if not more damage, and that's costing less FP.
I honestly can't think of a time that I used Bombette outside of Chapter 1. She isn't used for anything really, unless you're trying to unveil a secret entrance or some crack in the wall. But if I'm gonna be real with y'all, she isn't good at all. Fuck Bombette.
Now that I think about it, Paracarry is actually a pretty good partner, I just didn't use him that much. His shell shot can do a good amount of damage, and having to aim like it's Yoshi's Island is kinda cool. Airlift sucks because it just removes a single enemy from battle. These moves are useless! Running away and losing like 6 coins is always an option, you know. Air Raid is actually really good, because it does a lot of damage and can hit every enemy. Overall, he is pretty good. I guess I didn't use him that much because not long after you unlock Paracarry, Bo joins your party and, well, she's just better.
Paracarry is one of my favorite partners. His damage is ridiculous for Chapter 2 standards, and I would also use him for the boss in Chapter 2 as well. I found myself using his shell shot since it only uses 3 flower points, and the initial damage is 5, but he's pretty good nonetheless.
Lady Bo can literally bitch slap anyone that gets in her way, and just like Goomba, it does more damage than the other partners. She also holds Fan Smack, which is probably the strongest move in the entire game because it can do 10 damage. However, there is a big caveat to this, and that's how her normal attack only does 1 damage 6 times, and her Fan Smack does 2 damage 5 times. So if an enemy has any defense at all, Bo is already off the table. As for her other moves, Out of Sight is pretty good for 2 FP, since it lets Mario completely evade attacks for a turn, at the cost of losing Bo's next turn. Unfortunately, Spook is a pretty shitty ability, because it just scares enemies away from battle. No star points are given either, just like Paracarry. For some reason, both moves cost 3 FP, but Paracarry only removes 1 enemy, and Bo can remove all of them if you're good. I definitely used Bo the most because I think she's one of the best.
Lady Bo is good because she can deal the most damage efficiently with her bitch slap attack that does around 4 to 6 damage points.
Watt is also a really good partner in my opinion. 2 of her attacks are about stunning enemies, with one hitting a single target and the other hitting all enemies. Immobilizing them is always useful, even if there are other options to do that. He can also buff Mario's attack for a few turns.
Didn't you just say Watt was a she?
Yes, I did, and that's because not even the game knows what gender Watt is. When Watt is introduced, it's a she, but on the super blocks it says he. The manual goes with her, but I just thought it was funny. The main appeal of Watt, for me at least, is the fact that her base attack ignores defense and will do 5 damage no matter what. Because of this, Watt is basically the only partner you can use by the last chapter. Ignoring that, she's still very useful because of her support skills, and she competes with Bo for being my favorite.
The fact that Watt ignores defense is pretty good if you like bringing out the big guns in battles. I don't really use her other abilities, but she's a good partner for piercing defenses with her base attack.
Something I realized while writing this video is that Sushi is kinda just para-carry but better. Their base attacks are basically identical in both damage and range. Squirt costs the same FP as Shell Shot, and also does the same damage, in addition to being more effective on fire enemies, but that's only useful in Chapter 5. The action command for Squirt is a little harder than Shell Shot, because you have to be careful with reaching the max. Her Tidal Wave move is also the same FP as Air Raid, and both can hit every enemy. The damage on Tidal Wave can actually vary a lot since you have to hit the button that shows up as fast as possible, so you can do a lot of damage if you're really good with it. Because of that, this attack is just a little better, and instead of having Airlift, which is probably the worst move in the entire game, she has Water Block, which boosts Mario's defense for a few turns, which is definitely welcome. So everything Paracarry does, Sushi does it too, but a little better.
This is again a partner I don't really use for their other attacks, but Belly Flop and Squirt, get it, are really great attacks nonetheless. Brandt already summed up most of what I think about Sushi.
Lastly, we have Lackluster, and I don't think he's that good. His Spiny Surge ability hits every enemy, and it only does 4 damage. Like bro, there's so many better options when it comes to spread damage because 4 damage kinda sucks. Especially when you consider that you unlock him in Chapter 6, where enemies will have 10 HP at the bare minimum. I never really used Cloud 9, which buffs your evasion rate, because if I'm going to buff Mario with FP, I'd rather do something like attack or defense. Hurricane is another one of those moves that just removes every enemy from battle, and big shocker, it's not a good move at all. Why does this game give you so many abilities that just do that? Do they really expect me to use them like at all? I think I used Bow's Spook a total of once, and it was in a fight where I knew I wouldn't even get star points. Also, why is Hurricane 5 FP when Spook is 3?
Fuck Lackluster.
Those are all the partners in this game, and overall they're a great addition. It is true that not all partners are created equal, but you can move along just fine with most partners.
Your last option of attack comes from the star spirits that Mario rescues throughout the game. Each time you rescue one, your star gauge increases by 1, which is what you use to execute star abilities, and you also learn each star's respective moves.
Refresh increases Mario's HP and FP by 5 and also cures status ailments. I don't really get why this one only does 5, because it doesn't take that long until healing 5 HP isn't a lot. You could say the curing is the main appeal of this move, but it takes a long time until you get your proper star ability that heals Mario, and frankly I think you should have had one from the very beginning that heals like 10 or 15 HP.
Lullaby puts every enemy to sleep most of the time, and it's a great ability to use when you have a large group of enemies, or during a mini-boss. Some of these guys do insane amounts of damage, so the only real strategy is to immobilize them and go berserk.
Starstorm does 7 damage to every enemy, and unlike Refresh, it stays really useful through the entire game, because not including badges like Power Plus, you'll be doing 6 damage with your normal attack. So doing a little more damage than that, in addition to hitting every enemy, makes this one really handy.
Shell Out debuffs enemies' attacks by 3, which is also great for dealing with big crowds or tough enemies. Smooch is the proper healing ability, giving Mario 20 HP. Considering how the max is 50, it's pretty good despite being the most expensive one.
Timeout immobilizes all enemies, just like Lullaby. It's more star power too, so I'd usually prefer to just put them to sleep.
Up and Away carries every enemy out of battle without giving you the proper amount of star points, but it's usually the best to fight them for star points. The same reason using abilities like Hurricane and Airlift isn't really helpful.
Overall, that's all there is to the battle system of Paper Mario, and I think it was executed very well. And I genuinely never got tired of fighting. It simplifies some RPG mechanics and tweaks some others to craft a very unique turn-based combat experience. On paper, it may sound kinda simple, but I think it makes up for that inherent simplicity with the skill that's involved in the action command system, the strategy derived from choosing which badges and partners are best to equip for a certain situation, and the enemies and bosses that put this game's unique mechanics to great use. That's why I think this can be considered easy to learn but hard to master. I can't exactly confirm this because I played many RPGs before Paper Mario, but I'd imagine that this game would be pretty friendly to a beginner of the genre. Heck, maybe if you don't like RPGs, you might get a kick out of this combat, because it doesn't have many of the usual complaints I hear about RPGs, like the random encounters, the luck, and high damage values.
When you aren't fighting enemies, you're exploring the many different places the Mushroom Kingdom has to offer. Some of the locations are standard Mario stuff, like grasslands, desert, snow areas, ghost houses, but this game also has a few locations that are a little more unique, like the inside of a volcano, a toy box, and a flower garden. For an N64 game, they look pretty nice.
The choice of making characters 2D allowed them to put more detail into the 3D world you explore, and I think it paid off. Some places like Starhaven are just beautiful. The whole paper thing in the title is very minor. The locations aren't made out of paper mache and cardboard like some of the later entries. Now, what are you doing in these locations? Well, you'll be exploring, interacting with the environment, talking to NPCs, and solving a puzzle or two every now and then. Honestly, it's pretty standard RPG stuff. Mario can obviously jump, there might be some platforming every now and then, and you can also use your hammer to interact with the environment. Mario also has this spin move called the spin dash, which the game doesn't really tell you about. I just learned about it because I started mashing every button as soon as I started playing. Its only purpose is to let you traverse the world faster, and I like it because it looks like Mario has fun doing it. Once you equip the speedy spin badge, you'll make that Z button your bitch.
In between every chapter, you'll return to the game's central hub, Toad Town. In Toad Town, there are a lot of NPCs to talk to, if you really care about that stuff. But there are a lot of utilities, the badge shop, the item shop, and Tasty, who can cook your items to make even better ones. The little Oink Farm, the post office, and Merlon, who can give you hints on where to go for a few coin. You probably won't be using this guy after your first playthrough.
The main currency in this game is the staple Mario coins, which can be used to buy items and badges. Speaking of items, your inventory is very small. You can only hold like 10 items. I prefer to usually just fill it up with healing items. And speaking of currency, north of Toad Town is Shooting Star Summit, and in this house you can find Merlot, where you can trade star pieces for badges. How do you find star pieces? Well, they're actually all over the place, but you aren't going to know that. Star pieces are hidden under specific panels on the ground all over this game, but there's no distinction between the specific panels, so your only hope is using the I Spy badge. Kinda stupid, to be honest. You can at least get star pieces from doing some other tasks, like helping out NPCs, and the badges that are sold can actually be pretty useful, like Peekaboo, Zap Tap, and Pretty Lucky to name a few. There's also a warp pipe to go back to Mario's house, and you can enjoy a nice conversation with Luigi. Even the game knows he deserves more attention.
From Toad Town, you can explore the Toad Tunnels, which is a sewer area that opens up the farther you'll get in the game, since you'll have to use your new abilities to continue exploration. It's mostly optional until Chapter 7, where you have to find the Ultra Boots in the tunnels and reach Shiver City. The tunnels contain enemies, a few super blocks, and optional mini-bosses in the form of bloopers.
I didn't really notice this until my second run through the game, but Paper Mario is actually pretty good with offering you optional bosses. There are quite a few of them. The bloopers aren't really that notable, but a few other notable ones include the anti-guy from Chapter 4, Can't See Koopa, and the master at the dojo in Toad Town. The main gimmick in these fights comes from their insane damage output, so the strategy is about managing your HP that's rapidly ticking down, while trying to do as much damage as possible with your strongest abilities. Stunning them for a few turns is usually pretty helpful. Besides all that stuff, Toad Town acts as an area that leads Mario to the next location where a star spirit is held. Each chapter usually starts with you exploring a new area and fighting some enemies. You might run into a village with a lot of NPCs, and they usually end in some sort of dungeon that hosts the boss at the very end. The dungeons are a little different than overworld exploration because, on top of combat, you'll have to find key items to progress and solve puzzles. In dungeons, enemies don't respawn after killing them, but they do in the overworld. Some of the dungeons can have some interesting gimmicks, like the mirrors in the Crystal Palace that make for a lot of interesting puzzles. I really wish they went further in Chapter 3 with Tubba Blubba's presence in his castle, because I think it had some potential to create some genuine fear in the player. I think he should have always been in the halls of the castle, rather than just at the very end of the chapter, so when he would show up you would have to use Bow's invincibility, and that could have made things very tense. Maybe they could have put a time limit on it or something, so you have to use it very carefully.
Speaking of which, the partners that Mario meets on his adventure can also serve a purpose in the overworld by providing Mario with new abilities that make exploration more interesting. Goomba just tells you about the location you're in, so you'll never be using him.
He is pretty useful if you're dying to know that toads reside in Toad Town.
Koopa can reach faraway objects with his shell, which can also hit switches for puzzles. Bombette can explode and destroy walls.
And unlike star pieces, they are clearly different.
Parakarry can carry Mario over long gaps where jumping won't do the trick. Bow can make Mario invisible, which has interesting potential for puzzles, and it can also be used if you just feel like avoiding enemies. Watt can light up dark areas and reveal hidden blocks. It's probably used like 3 times in the entire game. Mario can ride Sushi to swim in water, and you can also press the button again to dive underwater, which was used for a few interesting puzzles. Mario can also ride Lackluster to cross lava or spikes, but you can ride Lackluster whenever you want when he makes you faster.
I think just spamming the spin dash with the speedy spin on is still faster, so I didn't use it that much. While the overworld exploration isn't as unique as the game's turn-based combat, it can still be fun, thanks to the partners. Puzzle solving and traversal can be more interesting when compared to most RPGs. It's not anything mind-blowing, but most RPGs don't usually really have anything super interesting when it comes to the overworld. That's mostly everything the gameplay has to offer in Paper Mario, and in case I haven't made myself clear, I think this game plays very well. Now we can get back to reviewing the story and adventure in this game, as we discuss what we think of each chapter.
I put a light spoiler warning here, but honestly there isn't much to spoil. But if you still would like to experience this game blind, which we do recommend, then I'd click off now or just skip to the conclusion.
I already discussed how the prologue is kinda boring, mainly because you can't even utilize action commands, but it's like an hour long and not a lot happens. It's just about establishing your goal and introducing the mechanics. You stop at Goomba Village for a bit and also recruit Goombario. He's alright. I don't think there's that much to say about his personality. He's just a clever little Goomba who wants to travel with Mario because he's a big fan. Chapter 1 is where things really get going, and this chapter is pretty good. I thought the prologue was decent at first, but this is when the game really gripped me, because of how the gameplay opens up here in the story of this chapter. Admittedly, it's pretty basic. You travel through a grassy area, visit Koopa Village, and traverse through a fortress. However, I think this chapter is elevated a lot by the characters it features, specifically the Koopa Bros, who ended up being some of my favorite characters in this game. It's obvious what they are a parody of, and I honestly just love their dynamic. They're so confident and prideful in themselves, and I loved seeing their reactions to how Mario would always mess up their plans, because they aren't that competent and are pretty clumsy. They're just a joy to watch in every scene they're in. I think the boss was pretty fun too, and I like their gimmick where they can actually do a lot of damage when stacked up, so you have to knock them over and kill all of them individually, or just use Koopa and kill them very quickly. In this chapter, you actually get two partners, with the first one being Cooper. Cooper is a young Koopa who wants to see the world, and looks up to the archaeologist Colorado. I think he's a pretty cool guy, but I wish his personality was fleshed out some more. This is an issue that basically goes with every partner, but after they join you, they don't really talk much. Mario is still a silent protagonist, so I wish partners could talk for Mario or express how they feel about certain things going on, but that just doesn't happen. The other partner in this chapter, Bombette, is alright. I like how she's basically just a menace. This chapter has some good music too, like the Koopa Bros theme, Bill Blaster Go Faster, and Attack of the Koopa Bros.
Honestly, chapter 1 in this game is bittersweet. It's good, but it can also be really boring at times, especially if you've played the game beforehand. Chapter 1 has its fair challenge in it, but if we were talking about the main boss, then it's stupidly boring. The Koopa Bros, in my opinion, just get played dirty. Having a short role in this game for only one part, that being chapter 1, but in all seriousness, chapter 1 is a good start to this game, and fairly enjoyable for what it is. Chapter 2 sees Mario traveling to Dry Desert, on the hunt for the Dry Ruins, where the Star Spirit is hidden. You start at Mount Rugged, as you have to collect a few of Parakarry's letters, and honestly, he doesn't have much of a personality besides being a mailman, who's actually pretty bad at his job. You get to explore the Dry Desert, which is a very open area, but getting lost isn't hard since you have to just go in the straight line to reach town. After that, you're then able to use the Pole Stone to discover the Dry Ruins, which has a gimmick where you have to control the sand in the other room. It's not a bad gimmick, to be honest. Eventually, you reach Tutton Koopa and fight him to rescue the second Star Spirit.
The boss fight is okay. He summons his Chain Chomp to attack you, but you can still focus on attacking Tutton Koopa, so he goes down rather quickly. Honestly, I feel like this is one of the more forgettable chapters in this game. I definitely wouldn't call it bad, but there aren't really any parts that are more than just good. The location isn't that interesting, and I'll be fair and say it's at least better than chapter 1 when it comes to aesthetics, but there aren't any memorable characters in this chapter, which is kinda jarring when it's right after the Koopa Bros. Tutton Koopa is one of the most uninteresting boss characters in this game, because he doesn't really have a personality. He tries to get you to turn back a few times, but he isn't nearly as prominent as the Koopa Bros in chapter 1. And in terms of music, I like Chomp Attack, but that's basically the only track I can remember. In terms of gameplay, I guess it's better than chapter 1, because you feel like you have more options, but this chapter isn't anything too special.
Now, don't get me wrong here, but chapter 2 is not bad at all. It's just the fact that you have to meet up with this guy who knows another guy, who has this item to get to this ancient ruins underground, that just has to have the Star Spirit in it. It's very forgettable and it's not that entertaining. But if we're going to talk about what the chapter has to offer, then there's the music and the characters you face, the eerie setting, and everything else. So then hell yeah, this chapter is pretty darn good. It just could have been a little bit more interesting with how the chapter is portrayed and set.
Okay, now we're getting to one of my favorites. For a while, I considered this my favorite chapter actually. You start chapter 3 in the Forever Forest, which is okay. It's easy to traverse without a guide, but either way, I still think it kinda drags on and isn't that interesting. The Boo's mansion is actually pretty cool in my opinion, because you take a break from battles to solve the Boo's puzzles, which I think is quite fun and a nice change of pace. Here, we're also introduced to Bo, who is my favorite partner personality-wise. She's a very sassy ghost, and I enjoyed seeing her go with Mario to avenge all the fallen ghosts. Speaking of which, the big bad guy in this chapter is Tubba Blubba, and I think he's the best boss character in this game when it comes to personality. I love how much he's built up over this chapter as this invincible monster who eats all the Boos. Head first, let that sink in for a bit. We later learn that he's just a big goofball, and I like how that clashes with his intimidating strength. I think this chapter just nails all the characters, seen with Bo and Tubba Blubba, and teaming up with the ghosts is really fun. This chapter is not perfect because the boss isn't actually very interesting. He'll charge up his attack on occasion, so you just have to use out of sight with Bo. In fact, enemies do that a lot in this chapter, which can get kind of annoying when it basically just drains your FP. I mean, hey, at least the boss music is one of the best tracks in this game.
Chapter 3 is amazing at what it portrays. The characters and story to it overall is just incredible. Maybe one of my favorite chapters in all of Paper Mario as a series. That's how good it is.
Overall, it's just a great chapter. Next up is Chapter 4, which is a bit more divisive than the other chapters I've looked at so far.
This time, the main plot involves Shy Guys causing a ruckus in Toad Town, as they're stealing everyone's belonging. You can't even do stuff like cook items or buy badges because the frying pan and calculator were stolen by Shy Guys, so you'll probably want to deal with that stuff fast. Their hideout is in this vacant house in Toad Town, which is a toy box.
This chapter has one of, if not my favorite setting in the entire game. The entire layout is very creative and it's a very unique aesthetic, especially since a lot of the visuals in this game aren't totally new like this one. Most of these places we've already seen in other Mario games at this point.
The rest of the chapter is about returning all the stolen items to the people of Toad Town, which will usually help you in your mission to stop the Shy Guys reigning over Toad Town and rescue this 4th star spirit.
So far, it sounds like this chapter has a lot going for it. If I love the aesthetic and think the Shy Guys are cool, I really like how they're basically just chaotic children stealing everyone's stuff since they see them as toys. However, the main thing people criticize about this part of the game is how there is a good amount of backtracking, because you'll have to get a certain item, return it to someone in Toad Town, and use your newfound items or knowledge to progress further in the toy box. It happens a few times, and on your first playthrough, it can feel like you're having to travel all over the place. Fortunately, some backtracking can be eliminated on future playthroughs, like this code you have to memorize. Realistically, you can't just look it up and avoid it nowadays, but I decided not to do that. We're also introduced to another partner in this chapter, Watt. Watt's design is probably the most unique in the entire game. Instead of being a normal Mario enemy with clothes or something, Watt is a ball of electricity with a pacifier. Her entire personality is the fact that she's just a baby, and like most partners, doesn't get much screen time. Seeing her infant-like reactions to some situations could have been nice if they did what I suggested earlier and have partners speak more often. As a boss, General Guy is not bad, but pretty simple. He hides in his tank, so you have to use Watt to penetrate his defense.
Chapter 4 is pretty fun at what it does, but let me tell you, the music just slaps. Besides the toy box theme, which can get repetitive, but nonetheless, this chapter is pretty damn good.
While this one does have some flaws, I still found myself really enjoying it, because besides the backtracking, everything else is really solid. Chapter 5 takes place on an island south of Toad Town called Lava Lava Island. Mario actually travels with Koopa's idol, Colorado, for this chapter because Colorado wants to discover some treasure hidden in Mount Lava Lava, and Mario just needs to rescue the Star Spirit. Colorado mostly serves as comic relief here because he always fumbles when trying to do something impressive, and everything he does is fueled by his desire for treasure. I think he's really entertaining to watch. We also get to visit Yoshi Village, and that's just awesome. And to make it even better, the music in Yoshi Village is a new rendition of the title theme from Yoshi's Island, which is even more awesome. And can I just say this now? This chapter has some really good music. There's of course Welcome to Yoshi Village, but you also get tracks like Jade Jungle, the Lava Piranha boss theme, and Escape from Mount Lava Lava. Speaking of Lava Piranha, it's a decent boss, but the hardest part is trying to nail the action commands with this damn lag. Your eyes are not deceiving you. This boss makes the game lag really bad for some reason. It makes it a lot harder than it needs to be, frankly. Sushi joins the party in this chapter. chapter, and she is great for combat, but does she really have a personality? I think she has like 2 lines.
Chapter 5 is meh in my opinion. I just don't like the amount of backtracking, and I think a lot of people can agree on me with that. Especially the part where you have to find a bunch of Yoshis that have gone missing, but chapter 5 isn't bad at all when it comes to everything else.
Overall, this chapter is one of my favorites in this game. There's so many cool aspects like Yoshi Village, the Lava Piranha, all the great music, Colorado, and you can't not love the aesthetic of going into a volcano. The only complaint I have is that some enemies can be annoying, specifically the ones that will constantly spawn other enemies in battle because it makes them drag on for a while, as well as the aforementioned lag. Next up, we have Chapter 6, which takes Mario to Flower Fields. Just like Shy Guy's Toy Box, it's also linked to Toad Town. But unlike that chapter, this one is probably my least favorite in the entire game. Let's run down all the issues. First of all, the story is nothing to write home about. You just have to save Flower Fields and stop Huffin, who I don't think is a very interesting villain. Lackluster is alright. He's basically a dork, and I kinda like that. I also like making fun of him because he isn't very useful in combat. When you're brought to Flower Fields, you'll start in this big room that has 6 different pathways to go to. The structure of this chapter involves going one way, getting an item, then bringing that item to a different path, maybe talking to 1 or 2 uninteresting NPCs, and repeating the cycle. That probably sounds like there's a lot of running back and forth, and that's because there definitely is. I thought chapter 4 had a good amount of backtracking, but man, there's so much of that in this chapter. And on top of that, remembering which pathways bring you to what is quite confusing, which will just cause even more frustration. Like, this chapter is just all about fetch quests. I begin to ask myself why I take issue with backtracking in this chapter a lot more than chapter 4, because both have their fair share of backtracking, but I think it comes down to the fact that the toy box is not very confusing, generally more interesting, and getting to other stations can be pretty quick. The topography of Flower Field is also not very interesting. Most of it is just a straight line with an NPC or something at the end. Compare this to another area like Jade Jungle, and the difference is night and day. The only part I can remember is this hedge maze, which is actually kind of annoying on a first playthrough because the game just expects you to know which walls you can go through. Speaking of annoying, some of these enemies really grind my gears, like the bees that get the first strike on you 90% of the time, and do a lot of damage but have like 3 HP. Thank God the chill out badge exists. Also, these crazy daisies take a really long time to wind up their attacks, so I hope you didn't like landing action commands. Also, they can put Mario to sleep sometimes, and isn't that just great? You also have the Lakitus that'll throw Spinies at you. And yeah, they are really weak, but they throw so many of them. And for the cherry on top of this diarrhea cake, enemies will respawn like every time you leave a room because it's technically not a dungeon, so you'll have to fight these annoying cockfucks pretty often. Not to mention, there isn't a lot of room to avoid encounters in Flower Fields because the pathways are pretty narrow. However, towards the very end when you're finally confronting Huffin, I think it actually starts to get really good because of the boss. I think his boss is one of the more mechanically interesting bosses and one of my favorites in this game. Whenever you hit him, tiny little Tuff Puffs spawn that Huffin can use to heal himself or deal damage, so you'll have to use some smart tactics in this battle. Also, the track that plays during this boss, Huffin and Puffin, is probably my favorite song in the entire game. I just think it's really good. I've been listening to it on repeat while writing this video, so overall this chapter still isn't that pleasant to play through, even if it rises in quality at the very end.
I agree with you, Brandt, but oh my god, I just do not want to talk about this chapter, yo. I hate this chapter.
I mean, the game itself is still great, and since this is a great game at its lowest point, it's still decent, but when compared to how great some of the other chapters are, it makes this one look straight up bad. Speaking of great, let's look at Chapter 7. It takes place in Shiver City, which is a cool snow area. Chapter 7 is one of my favorite chapters when it comes to the setting, because this place just looks beautiful in some areas. This one also has the best opening to a chapter by far, because you walk into this guy's house and get accused of murder. Suddenly, everyone in the town thinks you killed the mayor because you walked in on him as soon as he died.
It doesn't actually end up going that far, because the mayor wasn't actually dead. You begin to make some advancements in the case as you learn that the mayor has a friend who writes mystery novels, and he had a paper with his name on it at the crime scene. However, he was actually trying to grab a gift but slipped and got knocked out for a little bit.
At first, I was a little bit disappointed because I was excited to have a full-blown murder mystery chapter being the Ace Attorney fan that I am, but now I can still appreciate how fun trying to clear your name for these first 10 minutes is.
This chapter is also quite climactic since you're nearing the end of the game and you reach Starborn Valley, where Star Kids lived before rising up to Star Haven. You also travel through the Crystal Palace, the place where stars were honored before Bowser's troops invaded the place.
Speaking of the Crystal Palace, it's one of the best dungeons in this game because I think the mirror puzzles are quite interesting. Also, having to choose the right partner can be quite fun and also humorous. Some of the enemies in this place can put up a fight, but the difficulty is just right to the extent it's still really fun. And man, this chapter has some really good music. Detective Mario's Shiver City, the Crystal King boss theme, and Over Shiver Mountain, which is one of my favorites. The Crystal King is another boss that is pretty good and puts up a fight. I don't like how he just heals himself though. Honestly, it's an artificial way to make it longer. Because of all this, I consider Chapter 7 to be my favorite chapter out of all 8 because I think it executes everything very well. And trust me, it definitely has some competition.
I agree with everything you said, Brandt. Chapter 7 is arguably the best chapter in this game. It's just great altogether.
Lastly, we have Chapter 8, which is all about Mario confronting Bowser. The bulk of this chapter is just the dungeon, which I don't think is that bad. Does it drag on? Yeah, a little. But I appreciate how it tests your skills and your partner's abilities, at least in the overworld. Watt is basically the only viable partner at this point of the game, because so many enemies have spikes on their heads and a lot of defense. And I wish they made you put your other partners to good use. You get to use Koopa to deal fire damage to the occasional dry bones, which makes no sense by the way, but that's it. Even the final boss doesn't really take advantage of other partners besides Watt. And because of his defense, Watt is literally the only partner you can use here. Maybe there could have been like a giant Bowser that will let you target different parts of the body, and each part requires different kinds of attacks from your partners. I'm not a game designer, that's just an idea I had. Bowser also heals himself, and it gets kinda annoying when he goes from 20 to 70 HP in just a few turns. Because of that, I let that stupid ass Lackluster get the final blow. Still, the final boss is a fun and challenging fight because of his high damage output, so it may not be as disappointing as it sounds. What is disappointing is how the game tricks you into thinking you're gonna refight the Koopa Bros, and seeing them again put a smile on my face that later turned upside down when I realized it was just Junior Troopa coming in for one last battle. One of the first enemies you fight in this game is Junior Troopa, who doesn't put up much of a fight, but every 1 or 2 chapters, you run into him again and you'll get to fight as he grows stronger and stronger with each one. He's basically just a joke, and I don't think all of them are completely unfunny, but like, the Koopa Bros are just better. Okay, it may sound like I only have somewhat negative things to say about this chapter, so let's talk about some positives. It's still fun if I didn't make myself clear. This chapter has some great tunes like the dungeon theme, which starts ramping up the higher you climb through the castle, and man, King of the Koopas goes hard and really adds a lot to the overall quality of the final boss in my opinion, and I still really like the final boss, because it's a great climax for this game. I can't not love a chapter all about Bowser because his characterization in this game is great. We even get this fight where you play as Twink and Peach, and it's just as scripted as every fight from the prologue. I forgot to mention this until now, but in between every chapter, you take control of Peach for a little bit, and with her is Twink, a star kid who helps Peach and Mario throughout their adventure. All of the little episodes with Peach are mostly just about learning where the next star spirit is, including reading Bowser's diary, bribing an obese shy guy with a cake, or playing in a quiz show. They're harmless, I guess.
I really enjoyed Chapter 8. It may not be my favorite, but with its music and its final boss battle, it just fits super well all together, and the ending to this game is really enjoyable with a great conclusion to it all.
It's not one of my favorites, but Chapter 8 is still very enjoyable and a nice conclusion to the story, as Mario finally takes back the Star Rod and saves the Mushroom Kingdom from Bowser's reign. After the adventure is over, Peach invites everyone to her castle for an actual party, including all the friends that helped Mario. The credits begin to roll as a parade starts in celebration of how the day was saved, thus bringing us to the end of this great game with a great credits theme. Wait, Luigi?! I first played Paper Mario a few months ago, and man, I'm really glad I did. Paper Mario is a very unique game in almost every aspect that I have grown to love recently. It takes advantage of the RPG formula by providing us with a world that's full of charm thanks to its charming cast of characters. And Paper Mario does everything it can to create a unique RPG experience in the gameplay department. And I think it genuinely innovates on turn-based combat by making you take part in battles with the action command. It actually acknowledges a lot of things people don't like with RPGs, like the inherent luck and grinding.
Paper Mario means a ton to me. It's one of my favorite video games of all time, and I hope whoever is watching this video gives the game a shot sometime in the future as well. Trust me, you're gonna love it.
It's not perfect because there are some parts of the game I'm not a huge fan of, but overall, it's a great package with a great story, great gameplay, great soundtrack, and great visuals. I can't wait until I get to finish A Thousand Year Door, because from what I hear, it does nothing but improve the formula of this game.
You're welcome for that, by the way.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for joining me on this review too. I've been able to gain even more appreciation for this game on my second run, and going through it with you was a lot of fun.
No problem, dude. See you for the 1,000-year door.
Yep, you'll be there alright. This has been what makes Paper Mario so great. Oh crap, we forgot to mention Luigi's secret diary. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
My favorite diary entry is the one where he talks about riding some tuna fish. I don't even know.
Oh yeah? My favorite is the one where he says the next video is gonna be on Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon.
Wait, when does he say that?
Oh, are we still recording?